house of cards, better and better, trying harder?
Or are we compelled to serve the Lord out of love for him? The Bible says it is the goodness of God that leads us to repentance. We know we're saved by faith and not works, but is that how we relate to
Serving the Lord after we're saved? Are we almost doing these things as works we have to do for God? Now, there are downsides to a traditional identity structure, but there are also upsides. There are positive attributes. It leads us to put others before ourselves, which is a biblical principle. I think it's in Philippians. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. There's a strong idea of service and honoring legacy. However, the big downside is that acceptance in traditional identity is conditional. It can be lost. It can be threatened by shame or rejection from the group. So that's traditional identity. Modern identity is I define me. It's an inside-out approach to how you define yourself. It's all about what do I think of me. I'm not going to be like the crowd over here. I'm my own person. When the irony is, if we're so focused on not being like these guys over here, being my own person, aren't they still defining you? We're still giving them control and say over our lives because we're just going to do whatever they don't do. It's a farce. It's irrational. It's fragile. And it burdens us with having to figure out life on our own. But there is a positive side here as well. While traditional identity is all about conforming and doing what you're told and just thinking about others, forget yourself, to the point of steamrolling individuality, modern identity does honor a person's God-given uniqueness. And God has made us uniquely. I think of spiritual gifts. Ephesians chapter 4, Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, and 1 Peter 4 all discuss spiritual gifts God has given every one of us. And even if some people have the same gift, God can use it uniquely because no one has the same life experience, personality, and background. Now, gospel identity. This is where Jesus defines you. Not anyone else. You're not worried what other people think. And not yourself. You're not just trying harder to be a better person. I think it was A.W. Tozer, God just brought this to mind right before I came up, who said the most important thought a man can have is what he thinks about when he thinks of God. Is God a loving father? Or maybe is he like my earthly father, and there's some issues I'm a little nervous about there. Is God all loving? Does he show grace to me when I've fallen? Does he truly forgive all of my sins? I'd agree that that is an incredibly important thought to sort out in your life. And I'd say right up there, maybe not most important, but still life-changing, is what do you believe and receive that God says about you? God says as Christians, we are more than conquerors. Do we believe that? Do we live like it? I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. For with God, nothing shall be impossible. Not, well, I want to be in the NBA. God's going to make it possible. No, whatever God has for us in our lives, he will give us the strength to do it. And allow me to illustrate a gospel identity a little more with the story from the book about Carrie and his son. The road before them slithered downhill out of the mountains of Southern California. Carrie's son Larry was struggling in the seat next to him. Their ski trip turned into a medical emergency, a concussion resulting in memory loss, and sent Larry into a panic attack. He was in a psychological freefall, having lost most of his reference points, and his emotions were scrambling for solid ground. At this point, all kidding, all joking was off the table. The look in his eyes dramatically raised Carrie's level of alarm. Despite his panic, Larry kept using the name Dad. And that's when it hit him. Carrie thought, he still knows me. He trusts me. As he pulled the car over, he turned toward his son from the driver's seat. He placed his hand on his son's shoulders and issued a firm command. Larry, look at me. Look into my eyes. Take a breath. Larry did. Carrie continued, slowly. Larry, do you know who I am? Each word punctuated as if it were the most important question he ever asked. Yes, you're Dad. Yes, Larry, I am Dad. I know who you are, where we are, why we're here. I know how we got here and how to get you home. Larry's breathing slowed. His eyes locked into his father's. Tears brimmed over the rims of his eyes. Fear began to dissipate. He was trying hard to remember, but to no avail. Carrie said, just keep looking at me and listen carefully. I am Dad. Do you know that? He nodded. I am Dad. I know who you are, where we are, and where we're going. The repetition of those truths quieted him further. It calmed him down. Right now, your brain is bruised and needs to rest from remembering. Don't panic. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to get you home. Do you understand? With every breath, Larry's troubled mind found a place to rest in his father. He accepted these definitions. He rested in the fact that he knew his father, and his father knew him. Moments later, he asked, Dad, will my memories come back? His fear began to build up inside him again. What if they don't? What if I'm never able to remember again? Carrie just repeated the routine. Over and over, he reminded Larry, I'm Dad. I know who you are. We are going home. I'll drive. Stop trying. Just rest. I'm with you. Larry experienced deep loss. Everything he knew about himself had been mangled by the accident. He couldn't patch it together because he couldn't even find the pieces. As he sat in fear and uncertainty, what he most needed was the assurance of his true identity, the knowledge of who he really was, given by an authority who loved him and actually knew the truth. He needed a reliable orientation to the world around him, the kind that would resolve his noisy internal chaos. He couldn't make up his own answers, and he couldn't trust contrived answers from a total stranger. It was a combination of truth and love that had to be in the driver's seat of Larry's mind. Enter Dad. It was his dad's authoritative love that grounded him and rescued him from his unreliable imagination. His dad's knowledge liberated him from trying to remember. He received the identity conferred upon him. And similarly, truth and love must be in the driver's seat of our psyches. If we remove the truthful, loving, personal God from his rightful place, we remain hopelessly lost in chaos and floundering to secure ourselves with fragile solutions or meaningless rules of survival. Anything less than the authoritative validation of a loving father leaves us victim to weak identities. Wouldn't you like an identity that never fails? From a father whose love never fails? Enter Jesus. To understand the redefining nature of what Jesus has done through the gospel, the good news, I'd like to tell you a story about the meaning of the word gospel. It's a word that not only means you're saved, it also means you're made new and free to flourish in a new kind of life. The story begins in 490 BC, and the Athenians of Greece were terrified. The Persian Empire was sailing toward Greece with orders from King Darius I to march into Athens and burn it to the ground. It was to be a bloody and merciless battle, one that could define the future of Greece. The city of Athens mobilized a woefully insufficient army of citizens, unable to convince the neighboring Spartans to come to their defense. The Athenians had long believed they were helpless without Sparta, and that the powerful Persians just could not be defeated. They prepared for the worst as the Athenian army, along with soldiers from nearby Plataea, left home expecting never to return. Wives and children cried as their husbands and fathers marched off to battle at the Aegean coast. And for days, the situation seemed hopeless as the Athenians waited in fear, expecting to see the Persian army marching toward their defenseless city. And as expected, the Persians landed at the city of Marathon. But the Grecians managed to place the battle in a strategic location prior to their landing. And contrary to expectations, Athens' forces pressed into the battle, outsmarted their enemies, and sent the Persian army running to their ships. The Greeks overtook them and brought a huge victory for their families and for their nation. As they celebrated in Marathon, they remembered their family and friends at home. They didn't know they'd won. They remained terrified. And it was a strange situation. On the one hand, there's this great celebration in Marathon, and over here back home in Athens, there was agony, there was terror. Did we win? Have we lost? What's going on? They couldn't check Facebook and check the update. With no way to quickly get the news back home, what would they do? So, though this guy had already fought the battle of his life, the soldier was summoned immediately and given the task of running the good news 26 miles, from Marathon back to Athens. He was to publicly herald the victory. I imagine, though he was tired, though he'd been fighting the Persians, fighting for his life, fighting for his family, for his country, when given this task, new life, I imagine, surged into his battle-weary body, and energizing adrenaline coursed through his veins as his new mission drove him on. The Athenians must have held their breath, seeing a lone runner out in the distance, going as fast as he can to the city. What kind of news does he have? Did we win or did we lose? Is he coming to warn us? Run for your lives, save yourselves? Or is he announcing victory? And what emotion, what a party must have erupted in the city as his cries of victory were heard. The city celebrated, and the Athenian people were transformed because of this battle. The victory elevated Athens to prominence in Greek culture. It proved the Persians could be defeated, and it showed the Athenians they could successfully defend themselves without the Spartans. And this redefining moment in their history produced 200 years of flourishing Greek culture. Not to mention a lot of relieved and happy wives and children. And to this day, runners still run marathons of 26 miles, commemorating this victory. The Greeks had a term for the runner who heralded good news and its rewards. The word is euangelion, the same word the New Testament uses for gospel. The word expresses the public heralding and the rewards of a victorious battle. And this is the word picture God gives us to describe the gospel. If the Greeks had lost the battle, the runner would have made his trek, but with a terrifying message. Guys, we lost. The Persians are coming right behind me. We need to run. Run for your lives. Save yourselves. In essence, weak identities give us bad news. The battle is lost. Run for your life. Figure it out yourself. It's up to you. Whether religion, philosophy, or self-help, it all amounts to the bad news of how you can save yourself, hopefully. Weak identities flow from bad news, what you must do for yourself. A gospel identity flows from good news, what Jesus has already done for you. Jesus is both the conquering hero and the heralding runner, shouting good news into your heart. You are loved. You are secure. You are significant. The essence of a gospel identity, it grows as we immerse our hearts into what Jesus has done for us. We can know about it without actually experiencing it, but it is the experience that transforms us. It has to sink from our heads, a head knowledge, to our hearts, like the news of the runner would have for the citizens of Athens. It's when we understand that Jesus is far better than we dreamed, and his plans far more wonderful than our scripts for life. He is a big Savior who won a big battle. And he's calling us into his very big love and purpose for our lives. Jesus stepped down from heaven. He entered time and space to rescue us, a conquering hero riding into battle to fight for those he loves. He defeated death. He secured victory. And then he ascended out of battle as a valiant prince. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. He promises the gift of full and everlasting life to all who entrust themselves to him. It erupts within us the moment we truly comprehend it. This is when we stop telling our Creator who we are and start accepting his victorious love to define us. This is at our core to be rooted and grounded in Jesus as our supreme defining authority. He's not just to be the Lord of our lives and we'll do whatever you say, God. He defines us, and it's up to us to receive his definitions in our life. Colossians chapter 2, verse 7. Rooted and built up in him, and established in the faith, as ye have been taught, abounding therein with thanksgiving. This is who I really am, based on who he really is. This is to fully rely on how Jesus defines me. In choosing him, I lose autonomy to define myself, but I gain everything my heart is seeking. Whosoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it. Whosoever will lose their life for the Lord's sake will find it. The gospel makes your eyes go up and your heart go deep. Your identity is no longer horizontal. What do others think? What do I think? It goes vertical. You rest in the ultimate reality. I belong to God. He has given me all of himself. You grasp the soul redefining statement in Romans 8:31. If God be for us, who can be against us? You don't live up to others' demands or your own. Jesus already did that for you. You don't strive to be who others say you must be or be who you want to be, but you're free. You're free to be who God designed you to be. You don't live to please others or yourself, because God finds pleasure in you through Jesus. And living in that, and living out of his pleasure, is the most defining and joyfully motivating experience in life. Traditional identity gives priority to the others, and modern identity gives priority to the individual. But a gospel identity gives priority to Jesus. And Jesus gives value to both. Jesus brings the two together and reconciles the conflict between community and individuality. The two come together in ways that resolve our hearts, fulfill our lives, and connect us with our God, and strategically position us in the lives of those he calls us to love and to serve. This is where individual uniqueness meets a transcendent value and purpose in ways that both fulfill your heart and your call to bless others. It's the meeting point of all the attractive qualities of both traditional and modern identities without the flaws of either or how fragile they are. The gospel grounds you in vertical value, and it graces you with a horizontal purpose. The vertical relationship you have with Jesus, that becomes your supply of fullness, which then, with that supply, it overflows horizontally in a loving service of others. It affirms God-given individuality, properly realizing your uniqueness and properly restraining it at the same time. It affirms the value of community, responsibility, in a purely motivated love without enslaving you to other people's opinions or systems. It is radically fulfilling on every level. It doesn't crush individuality. It doesn't feel the need to run from community. It's full, it's complete in both spaces together. It grants you a security, a stability, and it prevents arrogance, dishonor, or defiance. It motivates you to serve in love, to labor from acceptance, because you are accepted. Not so that you will be accepted. And to honor God and others from a humble heart of gratitude. A gospel identity is free from fear and motivated by love to love others. This way of living is peaceful, it's energizing, and it's life-giving, as opposed to anxious and depleting and just feverishly working and trying and trying. This is who you were created to be. John chapter 14, verse 15. If ye love me, keep my commandments. John chapter 15, verse 10. If ye keep my commandments, ye shall abide in my love, even as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. Traditional identity says, obey out of duty. It's what you're supposed to do. Modern identity says, disobey in liberty, do your own thing. Gospel identity says, you are loved. So respond in loving obedience. Traditional identity says, stifle your dreams and desires for the sake of others. Don't worry about yourself. Modern identity says, well, express your dreams, follow your dreams, despite what others think. Gospel identity says, follow Jesus, and you'll see the fulfillment of better dreams that will move you to genuinely love others. John chapter 13, verse 34. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. Being shaped by the gospel will require the rest of your life. This is why Paul said, we can live confidently in the fact that Jesus began a good work in us and will continue that work until we see him. Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. Being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. First, you are born again in Jesus. And then the identity, the character of Jesus is formed in you. Galatians chapter 4, verse 19. My little children, for whom I am again in the anguish of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. In essence, we don't need to find our true selves, follow our hearts, or chase traditional and modern identity lies. What we need is to experience being found by our Father. For he alone knows who we really are. Going back to the author Carey and his son, Larry says, Dad, are you sure? Larry's eyes revealed the calm that had returned to his mind. He was asking his dad if he was sure his memory would return. Yes, Larry, I am absolutely sure. Through the entire ordeal, Larry never questioned who his father was. His own sense of self was smashed, but his reference points in his father remained. This is how a gospel identity grounds you regardless of life's circumstances. Larry let out a sigh. He slowly put his head back and he lowered his seat. His breathing slowed, his imagination calmed. You would guess he was thinking, I don't know who I am, but my dad does. Resting in that assurance gave him peace even before the crisis was resolved. He closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. Carrie, his dad, drove the winding mountain pass deep in thought. How often have I feared or worried my way through life, trying to figure out who I am or who I'm supposed to be, when I simply need to rest and let the truth about who Jesus is sink in? I need to accept what he has done for me and what he is doing in me. In him, my inner world can have calm and strength. This time, it was Carrie. It was the father who just sighed, prayed for Larry and himself. Jesus, please heal him. And please heal me in the same way. He slowly navigated each turn, not wanting to jostle his son's bruised brain. Larry's healing took time, but his sense of security was regained. Miles later, they ascended into the high desert and journeyed safely home. It took more than a year for Larry's brain to heal. He struggled with headaches, memory loss, and focus. School classes were more difficult, memorizing for tests nearly impossible. He faced a lot of frustration that year, but he never questioned who he was. His father's words grounded Larry that day the same way God's word grounds us. Lies and imagination become powerless. Anxiety expired as Larry embraced truth and rested in his father's love. This is how the gospel works in our lives, in our mind, and our psyche. The more we understand it, the more we appropriate it, apply it to our lives, the more it puts every identity struggle to rest. Have you surrendered your psyche to Jesus' declaration of good news? Have you accepted who he says you are? Nothing else can so permanently transform your heart in all the ways that define you and make you free. Jesus came to make us free from other people and free to be accepted by God once again. In terms of identity, the gospel makes you flourish in a world of traditional structures without being dominated by them. Jesus grants you a higher definition. In him you are free to grow into his image, not your own or someone else's. When your highest allegiance is Jesus, he will motivate you to love others without seeking an identity from them. He'll motivate you to love others without seeking your identity from them. Jesus also came to make us free from ourselves and from being lost in an ocean of self-definition. In terms of identity, the gospel affirms your individuality and makes your unique design significant to God and valuable and of service to others. Gospel identity gives us in reality what other options promise and can't deliver. This is the version of us that cannot be constructed. It was created. We cannot work to win it. Jesus did the work to redeem it. We cannot live up to it, build a bigger and better house of cards. We must learn to live out of it. The gospel shapes us as givers rather than takers. We approach relationships from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. We approach life from provision rather than neediness. We pour ourselves out in all the loving and honorable ways a traditional identity would demand, but willingly and gladly, not for identity, not for acceptance, but from a place of identity and acceptance. We can serve lovingly regardless of the response or approval we get from others. Our core motivation and our core definition becomes vertical. Insecurities melt away into God's full security that he gives us. This approach thinks this way: I am the child of a limitless, loving Father. He has welcomed me into his heart. and placed me strategically into his purposes. He created me to be who I am, where I am, for those he placed in my life. I can confidently be who he designed and calls me to be. I can run my own race without comparing, without contending, winning over others, or living to please others. I can serve others without needing their validation. I can live in obscurity, stay in the background, serve back here, no one see me, and yet be completely fulfilled, if that is my Father's will. He gives me the value my heart desires. Loving him leads to obeying him. Being defined by him leads to a peace in your heart. Being known and cared for by him produces deep joy and security that allows me to love others freely. Good news. You don't have to go searching for yourself. You don't have to find yourself. He knows you. He has found you. It's in his voice you most need to hear, not your own, not your heart's, not the culture's. Your creator and definer has authored the truest version of you. And if by chance you have never turned to him in faith and welcomed him into your heart, why not right now? It's a simple moment of belief. John chapter 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. It is a heartfelt belief, and it is an expressed faith. Romans chapter 10, verse 9, 10, and 13. That if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. For with the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. For whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. If you haven't before, call out to Jesus personally and ask him to come into your life right now as your Savior and as your Lord. Let your identity journey with Jesus begin by receiving the forgiveness and love he died to provide. He knows who you really are. So like Carrie's son, Larry, put your head back. Sigh with contentment, not defeat. Rest. God knows you, and God's bringing you home. Hebrews chapter 4 tells us more about this rest in verses 9 through 11. There remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God. For he that is entered into his rest, he also has ceased from his own works, as God did from his. Let us labor therefore to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief. We can stop trying because God has given us a done salvation. We have a done faith, not a doing. The work has already been done. It has been completed by Jesus. So we can rest. The labor, like it says in verse 11, the labor as Christians is simply entering into his rest and allowing him to live through us. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. When I first started working at the farm some years ago, they gave me some pretty straightforward tasks. I was new, had no idea what I was doing. They were very gracious. I'd sweep the shop where we worked on equipment. I'd hand someone a wrench and hope it was the right one. Sorry, Nathan, usually wasn't. Sometimes they'd even let me run a tractor. My first couple times operating a tractor, I was pretty nervous. Even more so than I am right now. At least for the first hour or two as I'd get going. So when they'd show me the controls, I needed to know for that job, cultivating a field, usually, simpler stuff. I'd always ask, okay, got it, This moves the thing up and down. This is go. This is don't go. If I panic, if I don't know what to do, something goes wrong, tractor, tillage, whatever, what do I do? Just very simply show me what to do. But the first few times they would show me how to run a tractor, I always, okay, if I don't know what to do, what do I do? I share this with you because in life, when things get hard, you don't know what to do, what do? Traditional identity says, conform. Think about what someone else would want you to do. What's right in the eyes of others? Try harder. Modern identity says, rebel, choose yourself, do your own thing. Just try that harder. Gospel identity, when you don't know what to do, look to Jesus. Enter into his rest. Lord, I don't know what to do. Things are hard right now. I'm panicking. God, I know what you'd have me to do right now is just look to you. What would you have me do? Might not get an answer right away, but you can enter a place of rest and faith that God will lead you. After the author, Carrie Schmidt, lived for more than 20 years in the desert, he had forgotten about fireflies. Just forgot they were a thing. Then, unexpectedly, they came back into his life. Shortly after, he moved to New England. He stood on his back deck one summer, and it was at nighttime, and he caught a faint flicker of light. He thought, I recognize that. So he turned off all the nearby lights. He stood very still, and he stared into the darkness. He called to his wife, Dana, come here, look. There was another flicker of light, and then another. And as his eyes adjusted, he felt like a kid again. How many childhood nights had he captured fireflies, put them in a jar, and then just drifted off to sleep as he could see other flickers of light? That night on the back deck came alive, decades later, as he and his wife delighted over God's display of subtle beauty. But a strange thing happens. Every summer, the rush of life can make the flickers seem faint. They can go unnoticed. Unadjusted, distracted eyes miss the fireflies. You forget about them. To see this subtle, extravagant miniature light show, you must intentionally stop and stare. You have to want to see it. Gospel identity is similar. We've seen the flickers. We've walked with the Lord, but we need our eyes to adjust. We need to pause and focus. The longer we stare at God's display of perfect love, the brighter the reality of the gospel grows and the more amazed we become with who Jesus is and what he has done for even me and even you. Psalm chapter 34, verses 4 and 5. I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and delivered me from all my fears. They looked unto him and were lightened, and their faces were not ashamed. Pausing to look for and look on Jesus produces a radiant, glowing face, a confidence, a security. And amazing things happen when we allow a gospel identity to grow. We'll look more at that next week. 6 ways a gospel identity moves from just knowledge of a gospel identity to experience. We have a few minutes. Do we have any questions, comments? Yeah.
I was just looking at here. I was thinking about, I was trying to get ahead of the game, so I looked at some discussion questions.
Yeah.
But I noticed the first two is how does the gospel reconcile the weak identities, and then number two is how does the gospel set us free? But I thought they kind of went together because I just wrote down that the cool thing about the gospel is the gospel the gospel is good news because there's bad news, and because it exposes our weakness, it exposes our sins. I think that takes place when we get saved. But even today, after being saved many years, there's security in the gospel, and there's freedom in the gospel because it exposes my weakness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not like, you know, we always try to build these identities, you know, in the Christian world and this traditional deal, but the gospel reminds me that, yeah, you're a sinner. You need forgiveness. So it exposes our weakness and our sin, and it relies on His strength. So the idea of the gospel does that every day. So that's just cool in relation to what you're saying.
Yeah, for sure. I've noticed personally, one way I appreciate more what Jesus has done for us. I appreciate more God's love for my life, just realizing the intensity and the seriousness of sin, and just how unfair the gospel is. Jesus came down from heaven, lived a humble life, was mocked, tortured, beaten, died. He didn't do anything wrong.
Right?
Romans had said some people would die for a good man, maybe, or some for a great man, maybe a few yet for a good man. Who would die for a sinner?
Yeah.
Jesus would. Yeah, I love the contrast. The gospel reminds us where we're at, and that just shows how great God is. Anything else? Jordan? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.